And I'm Whitney, 35 years old, and last month I lost my grandmother Eleanor, the woman who raised me after my parents died. What I didn't expect was inheriting 3 apartment buildings she secretly owned. I decided to keep it quiet while grieving, but somehow my mother-in-law Barbara found out. 7 days after the funeral, she showed up at my door with a notary and transfer papers, ready to claim everything. What she didn't know was that my grandmother was always 2 steps ahead. Before I tell you how I outsmarted my scheming mother-in-law, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and subscribe if you've ever had to deal with toxic family members. Trust me, what happened next will shock you. My grandmother Eleanor was my rock. After losing my parents in a car accident when I was just 8 years old, she stepped in and raised me on her own. We lived in a modest 2-bedroom house in a middle-class neighborhood in Portland. It wasn't fancy, but it was filled with love and important lessons about hard work and integrity. Whitney, she would tell me while we tended her small vegetable garden, no one can take away what you earn through honest work and smart decisions. At the time, I thought she was just teaching me about saving my allowance. I had no idea how prophetic those words would become. Eleanor worked as a high school librarian her entire career. She lived frugally but comfortably and always made sure I had everything I needed for school and my hobbies. I never suspected she had significant assets hidden away. She was secretive about finances, but I assumed that was just her Depression-era mentality of privacy around money matters. I met my husband Mark at a charity fundraiser for the local children's hospital 6 years ago. I was there with my architecture firm, which had donated design services for their new wing. Mark was charming, attentive, and seemed genuinely interested in my work and passions. He worked in financial services, and we connected over our shared interest in how thoughtful design and smart financial planning could improve communities. What I initially saw as kindness and consideration in Mark one later realized was people-pleasing behavior. He struggled to say no to anyone, especially his mother Barbara. But in those early dating days, his desire to make everyone happy seemed sweet rather than concerning. The first time I met Barbara was at a dinner Mark arranged at an upscale restaurant downtown. She arrived dressed impeccably in designer clothes, multiple gold bracelets jingling on her wrist. She hugged me with practiced warmth, her perfume almost overwhelming. "So you're the architect," she said, looking me up and down. "How interesting. I always told Mark he should date someone creative. Balance out all that analytical thinking he does." Throughout dinner, Barbara asked questions that seemed friendly but carried subtle digs. She wanted to know where I went to school, not an Ivy League to her disappointment, where my parents were deceased, and where I lived a small rental apartment. With each answer, her smile remained fixed, but her eyes grew cooler. "Well," she said finally, "at least you're self-sufficient. I raised my children to value independence, though family always comes first in the end, doesn't it?" As an architect, I had built my career from the ground up. After graduating with student loans, I worked 80-hour weeks at a small firm before eventually becoming a project manager at one of Portland's most respected architecture companies. Every promotion, every raise, every professional achievement came through dedication and hard work. Nothing was handed to me, and I took pride in that. Barbara, on the other hand, had married into wealth and spent her adult life cultivating an image of affluence and social importance. Her entire identity revolved around her address in the city's most exclusive neighborhood, her membership at the country club, and her position on various charity boards. She measured everyone's worth by their bank account and social connections. I soon learned that Barbara had orchestrated every major decision in the lives of Mark's siblings. His older brother married a woman Barbara selected from her social circle. His younger sister lived in a condo Barbara had purchased, working at a company where Barbara knew the owner. Everyone in the family operated under Barbara's influence, and those who resisted found themselves subtly excluded from family events and information. When Mark and I got married, we bought a small starter home that needed renovation. It stretched our budget to the limit, and we took on significant loans to make it happen. While I saw it as an investment and enjoyed applying my architectural skills to our own space, Barbara viewed it as proof of our financial inadequacy. "You know," she would say during her unannounced visits eyeing our IKEA furniture and DIY kitchen remodel, "Mark grew up in a proper home. I worry that he's adjusting to this lifestyle." Barbara frequently offered help that always came with conditions. She wanted to give us money for a down payment on a bigger house, but only in neighborhoods she approved of. She offered to pay for a vacation, but insisted on coming along. When we needed a new car after an accident, she found one through her dealer, and had already selected the model and color before telling us about her gift. I maintained firm boundaries despite the pressure. When we needed something, we saved for it ourselves. When we made decisions about our home or careers, we made them based on our own values, not Barbara's expectations. This created tension, but Mark usually supported me in these boundaries, at least initially. Then my grandmother's health began to decline. What started as occasional forgetfulness progressed to a diagnosis of advanced heart disease. I took time off work to care for her, spending hours at her small house, making meals, managing her medications, and simply sitting with her as she reminisced about her life. During this difficult time, Barbara showed her true colors. She complained about my absences from family dinners. She made dismissive comments about Eleanor, referring to her as your grandmother situation, as if my only living relative was an inconvenience to her social calendar. You know there are facilities for elderly people, Barbara suggested one day over coffee. It seems excessive for you to be spending so much time there. Mark says you're hardly ever home anymore. I was hurt that Mark had been complaining to his mother instead of talking to me directly, but when confronted, he denied saying anything of the sort. It was my first clear glimpse of how Barbara manipulated situations, creating division where none existed before. As Eleanor's condition worsened, I treasured our final conversations. Never once did she mention any significant assets or property investments. Her focus was on making sure I knew how much she loved me and how proud she was of the woman I'd become. 2 days before she passed, she held my hand and said something I didn't fully understand at the time. I've arranged everything to protect you, Whitney, just like I always have. Trust Peterson when the time comes. He knows what to do. I thought it was the medication talking, or perhaps confusion. I had no idea who Peterson was or what she had arranged. I simply kissed her forehead and told her I loved her, not realizing those cryptic words would soon become my salvation. The day of my grandmother's funeral was surreal. The small chapel was filled with her former colleagues from the school neighbours who had known her for decades, and a few distant relatives I barely knew. Mark stood beside me, his arm around my shoulders as I greeted mourners and accepted condolences. Barbara had come too dressed in black, that somehow still managed to look ostentatious, with her signature gold jewellery and a hat that seemed more appropriate for a society wedding than a modest funeral. Such a simple service, she whispered to Mark, not quite quietly enough. I suppose it's what Eleanor would have wanted. I was too grief-stricken to be angered by her insensitivity. Eleanor had been my only real family, the person who shaped me into who I am. Her loss left me feeling unmoored and vulnerable in a way I hadn't experienced since losing my parents. After the service and burial, everyone gathered at Eleanor's small house for refreshments. As people shared stories about my grandmother, a man in his 60s approached me and introduced himself as James Peterson, Eleanor's attorney. The name immediately triggered recognition from her final days. Mrs. Mitchell, when you have time, Eleanor asked me to meet with you privately regarding her estate, he said quietly. There's no rush. Take the time you need to grieve. But here's my card when you're ready. 3 days after the funeral, still moving through my days in a fog of grief, I visited Mr. Peterson's downtown office. The space was traditional but welcoming, with leather-bound law books lining the walls and a large window overlooking the city park. Thank you for coming, Mrs. Mitchell, he said, gesturing to a comfortable chair across from his desk. Eleanor spoke of you often and with great pride. He opened a file folder and placed a document in front of me. This is your grandmother's will. As her sole heir, she has left everything to you. But what you may not know is exactly what everything entails. What came next was so unexpected, I initially thought I'd misheard him. Eleanor owned 3 apartment buildings in the downtown area. He explained, pointing to addresses listed in the will. She purchased them gradually over the years as investments beginning in the 1980s, when downtown property was more affordable. I stared at him in disbelief. Apartment buildings? My grandmother, the librarian, owned apartment buildings. Mr. Peterson smiled gently. Your grandmother was an exceptionally shrewd investor. She lived through hard times and understood the value of tangible assets. The properties are all in good condition, fully occupied with long-term tenants, and professionally managed by a company she's worked with for years. He slid another document across the desk showing recent appraisals. The combined value of the 3 buildings is approximately $2.5 million, not including the monthly rental income they generate. The room seemed to spin around me. $2.5 million, my grandmother, who clipped coupons and bought generic brands, who drove the same car for 20 years, had accumulated this level of wealth without anyone knowing. She was very private about her investments. Mr. Peterson continued, sensing my shock. She started small with savings from her librarian salary and made careful, conservative investments over decades. The first property was purchased with a small inheritance from her own parents. She leveraged that successfully to acquire the others. He showed me photographs of the buildings. One was a converted Victorian with 6 apartments, another a small brick building with 8 units, and the third a mid-century building with 12 apartments. All were in good neighbourhoods with stable rental histories. She wanted you to have financial security, Mrs. Mitchell. She worried about you having to rely on others. In that moment, I wondered if my grandmother had sensed something about Mark or his family that I had missed. Had she seen warning signs I was blind to? After discussing the practical aspects of the inheritance taxes and management options, I left Mr. Peterson's office in a daze. Walking back to my car, I felt both overwhelmed by this unexpected wealth and deeply moved by my grandmother's foresight and care. I decided not to tell anyone about the inheritance immediately. I needed time to process both my grief and this startling revelation. When I got home, Mark was waiting, curious about the meeting. It was mostly formalities. I said not exactly lying, but not revealing the full truth. She left me her house and some savings. The lawyer's handling the details. Mark nodded sympathetically. That's good. One less thing for you to worry about right now, though we should probably tell my family at some point. Mum was asking about it. A small alarm bell rang in my mind. Why would Barbara be asking about my grandmother's will? I pushed the thought aside, attributing it to grief making me paranoid. There's time for that later, I said. Right now, I just need some space to grieve. Mark agreed, but over the next few days I noticed Barbara's unusual interest in my family matters. She called more frequently than usual, always finding a way to steer the conversation toward Eleanor's affairs. Have you sorted through her things yet? Sometimes elderly people keep cash around the house. Did she have any investments? Even teachers have pension funds. That little house of hers must be worth something in today's market. Each question made me more uncomfortable. I gave vague answers, saying things were still being settled and I wasn't ready to discuss it. This seemed to frustrate Barbara, though she masked it with concern. I'm only asking because these matters can be complicated, she said during one call. Mark mentioned you met with a lawyer. If you need help managing any inheritance, our family financial advisor is excellent. The eagerness in her voice sent a chill through me. When I mentioned Barbara's questions to Mark, he dismissed my concerns. Mom's just being Mom, he said with a shrug. She likes to be involved in everything. You know how she is. That was precisely what worried me. I did know how she was. In the days that followed, I sometimes felt like I was being watched. Twice I noticed a car similar to Barbara's parked near our house when I returned from meetings with Mr. Peterson. Once I came home early from work to find Barbara in our house, claiming she was dropping off some food for us. She seemed startled to see me, and I later discovered my home office door was unlocked, though I always kept it closed. 2 weeks after learning about my inheritance, I met with Mr. Peterson again to discuss the property management company Eleanor had used. He introduced me to the manager, a competent woman named Grace, who had worked with my grandmother for over 15 years. The buildings are all in excellent condition, Grace assured me. Eleanor was meticulous about maintenance and updates. All units are currently occupied with tenants who've been there an average of 7 years. The rental income after expenses and management fees comes to about $12,000 monthly. The figure stunned me. That was more than I made at my architecture job. Combined with my salary, this income would completely transform our financial situation. We could pay off our mortgage and student loans within a year. We could travel, save for retirement, maybe even start the family we'd been delaying due to financial constraints. But despite this excitement, something held me back from sharing the full details with Mark. My grandmother's cryptic final words kept replaying in my mind. I've arranged everything to protect you. Had she known I would need protection, and if so, from what? Over the next few days, Barbara's presence in our lives intensified. She began showing up unannounced at dinner time, always with some flimsy excuse about being in the neighbourhood. She brought casseroles we didn't ask for, offered to help organise Eleanor's belongings, and constantly tried to insert herself into my grieving process. One afternoon, I came home early with a migraine to find Barbara in my home office. She jumped when I entered, quickly shutting a drawer on my desk. "Oh, Whitney, I was just looking for a pen to leave you a note," she said, her hand fluttering to her chest. Mark gave me the spare key for emergencies. I brought soup. On my desk, partially covered by her purse, was a copy of Eleanor's will that I had brought home to review. My blood ran cold as I realized what she had been doing. "I found this while tidying up," she said, noticing my gaze. "I didn't mean to pry, but apartments, Whitney, your grandmother owned apartment buildings. Why didn't you tell us?" Her tone was conversational, but her eyes were sharp with interest. I felt violated, my private grief and inheritance exposed without my consent. "I'm still processing everything," I said stiffly, "and I'd appreciate it if you'd return my key and call before coming over in the future." Barbara's expression hardened momentarily before shifting to concern. "I'm just worried about you, dear. This is clearly overwhelming for you. Property management is complicated. Mark has experience with investments through his work. He should be handling this for you. I'm an architect, Barbara. I understand buildings and property management. But not financial matters," she countered smoothly. "This is a family concern now. What affects you affects Mark, and what affects Mark affects all of us." That evening, Mark and I had our first real argument about his mother. I told him about finding her snooping through my office and her suggestions that he should control my inheritance. "She's just trying to help," he said defensively. "And she's right that it affects both of us. We're married. Shouldn't we make decisions about this kind of money together?" "Of course we should discuss it," I agreed. "But that's between you and me, not your mother. And I need to understand why she was going through my desk while I wasn't home." Mark's expression grew uncomfortable. "She mentioned finding the will accidentally while bringing in some mail. I'm sure she wasn't snooping deliberately. The mail was delivered to a locked box at the curb, not through our front door. Barbara would have had no legitimate reason to handle our mail." Mark's willingness to believe this obvious lie was deeply troubling. The next morning, Barbara called while Mark was in the shower. Her voice dripped with false sweetness. "Whitney, dear, I want to apologize for yesterday. I was just so surprised by your news. Those properties must be such a burden on top of your grief. Why don't you and Mark come to dinner tonight? We can discuss how the family can help you manage this situation." Before I could decline, she added, "Mark already agreed, 7 o'clock. That evening, at Barbara's lavish home, I realized I'd walked into an ambush. Not only were Mark's siblings and their spouses there, but also Barbara's financial advisor and a real estate agent she introduced as an old family friend. Throughout dinner, Barbara dominated the conversation, speaking about my inheritance as if it were a family asset. "Whitney has been blessed with these properties from her grandmother," she announced. "But as we know, real estate can be a liability without proper management. Richard here has some excellent insights about the current market for apartment buildings." The real estate agent launched into a speech about sellers' market conditions and maximizing return on investment through immediate sale. The financial advisor followed with complex tax scenarios that made keeping the properties sound like financial suicide. Mark's siblings chimed in with comments about family security and how selling the buildings and investing the money through Barbara's advisor would benefit everyone in the long run. I sat in stunned silence, watching as my inheritance was being divided up without my input. When I finally spoke, my voice was steady despite my internal rage. "Thank you all for your concern, but I've already met with my grandmother's property manager and attorney. The buildings are well maintained, fully occupied, and generating significant monthly income. I have no intention of selling them." The room fell silent. Barbara recovered first, her laugh brittle. "Oh, Whitney, you can't possibly want to be a landlord. It's so common and time-consuming. Richard tells me the market could turn any day now. Selling quickly would be the prudent choice. My decision is final," I said, standing up. "Mark, I'm not feeling well. We should go." In the car, Mark exploded. "You embarrassed my mother in front of everyone. She was trying to help you. Help me or help herself to my inheritance?" I shot back. "They were carving up my grandmother's legacy like vultures. That's my family you're talking about. Mum has our best interests at heart. She always has. Your best interest, maybe, not mine." The argument continued at home, with Mark revealing that Barbara had confided in him about serious financial troubles. Apparently her lifestyle had outpaced her income for years, and she had significant debt. She had positioned my inheritance as a solution to her problems, painting it as family helping family. "She raised me, Whitney. I can't just ignore her needs when we're about to come into all this money," Mark argued. "It's not our money," I corrected him. "My grandmother left those buildings to me, not us. She worked her entire life to build that investment." Mark's expression turned cold. So you're choosing your dead grandmother over your living husband and his family, is that it? His cruelty stunned me into silence. The man standing before me felt like a stranger, his face contorted with an entitlement I'd never seen before. The next day, I discovered that Barbara and Mark had taken things even further than I imagined. One of the tenants called confused about a voicemail left by the new property owner's family regarding upcoming changes to the building. Barbara had somehow obtained the tenant contact list and was already positioning herself as having authority over my properties. That night, as Mark and I continued to argue, the truth became painfully clear. Our marriage had been built on shifting sand. The man I thought I knew was actually controlled by his mother's manipulation, unable or unwilling to stand up to her even when she was clearly wrong. My mother thinks we should reconsider our living situation if you're going to be difficult about this, he said, voice cold. She's offered us the guest house on her property until we find a place in her neighbourhood. I'm not leaving our home and I'm not selling the apartments, I replied firmly. Mark's ultimatum came the next morning over breakfast. Transfer the properties into both our names so we can make decisions together, or I'm filing for divorce. He clearly expected me to crumble to give in rather than lose my marriage. Instead, I felt an odd sense of clarity and calm. If those are my only options, then I guess we're getting divorced. The shock on his face would have been comical if the situation weren't so painful. He had never imagined I would choose my independence over his manipulation. By that evening, he had packed several suitcases and moved to his mother's house, promising that her lawyer would be in touch. Once alone, I finally allowed myself to break down. I cried for the marriage I thought I had, for the partner I believed would always support me, and for the future we had planned together. But beneath the pain was a growing sense that I had narrowly escaped something far worse than divorce. The next morning, I called Mr. Peterson and scheduled an emergency meeting. I arrived at his office disheveled and exhausted, having barely slept. They're trying to take the properties, I explained, detailing Barbara's manipulation and Mark's ultimatum. He's threatening divorce if I don't transfer them into both our names. I'm afraid of what they might do next. Mr. Peterson listened calmly, taking notes. When I finished, he did something unexpected. He smiled. Mrs. Mitchell, do you remember what your grandmother said about arranging everything to protect you? I nodded, confused by his apparent lack of concern. Eleanor came to see me 6 months ago when her health began to decline. She was worried about exactly this scenario. He opened a drawer and pulled out a thick folder. Your grandmother didn't just leave you those buildings in her will. She created an irrevocable trust with you as the sole beneficiary. The properties were transferred into that trust 2 months before she passed away. A trust? What does that mean exactly? It means, he said, laying out the documents that you don't technically own those buildings directly. The trust does. You control the trust and receive all benefits from it, but the assets are legally protected from outside claims, including those from a spouse during divorce proceedings. The implications slowly dawned on me. So Mark and Barbara cannot touch them, he finished. Not through divorce, not through coercion, not through any legal means. Eleanor made certain of that. Tears filled my eyes as I realized the full extent of my grandmother's foresight and protection. Even from beyond the grave, she was looking out for me. Mr. Peterson handed me a sealed envelope. Eleanor asked me to give you this if such a situation ever arose. Inside was a letter written in my grandmother's familiar handwriting. My dearest Whitney, if you're reading this, then someone is trying to take what rightfully belongs to you. I've watched you build your life with determination and integrity values I tried to instill in you. But I've also watched your husband's family, particularly his mother, and recognized patterns that concerned me deeply. Some people believe they're entitled to what others have earned. They use manipulation, guilt, and family obligation as weapons to get their way. I created this trust not because I didn't trust you, but because I wanted to ensure that what I built over my lifetime would remain yours regardless of what pressures you might face. The apartments aren't just buildings. They represent decades of careful decisions, sacrifices, and patience. They are my legacy to you, and no one has the right to take them from you or make you feel guilty for protecting what is yours. Stand your ground, my strong girl. You've always had the courage to do what's right, even when it's difficult. Know that I am proud of you, and that true family supports your independence rather than undermining it for their own gain. With all my love, Grandma Eleanor. I clutched the letter to my chest, overwhelmed by emotion. Through her careful planning, Eleanor had given me not just financial security, but the strength to stand up for myself when it mattered most. There's more, Mr. Peterson said gently. The trust has specific conditions that Eleanor insisted upon. One of them is a provision that explicitly prevents any transfer of assets to Mark Mitchell or any member of the Mitchell family. She named them specifically? I asked, astonished. She did. Eleanor mentioned having met Barbara at your wedding and several times after. She said there was something about her that set off alarm bells. Her words, not mine. We spent the next hour developing a strategy for handling Barbara's inevitable escalation. Mr. Peterson helped me document all instances of attempted interference with the properties. We changed the locks on my house, and the management company added security measures at the apartment buildings. I also met with a divorce attorney recommended by Mr. Peterson, who helped me protect my other assets and prepare for what would likely be a contentious split. As expected, Barbara exploded when she learned about the trust. My phone was flooded with voicemails and texts alternating between threats and tearful pleas about family loyalty. Mark's messages started angry, but gradually shifted to attempts at reconciliation as he realized the properties were legally untouchable. "Baby, we can work this out," one message said. "Mum was just trying to help. We don't need to involve lawyers. Come stay with me at Mum's and we'll talk." The transparent attempt to get me under Barbara's roof and influence made me even more certain I was making the right decision by ending the marriage. A surprising ally emerged during this time. Jessica, who was married to Mark's brother, called me privately. "I know what Barbara's like," she said hesitantly. "She did something similar when my parents died and left me some money. She convinced Thomas that we should invest it with her financial guy. We lost everything, and somehow it was my fault for trusting the wrong advisor, even though it was her choice." Jessica revealed that Barbara had a history of manipulating family members' finances, always positioning herself as the matriarch who knew best. Those who resisted found themselves ostracized until they gave in or cut ties entirely. "Thomas is too deep under her control," Jessica confided. "But I want you to know you're not crazy or selfish for protecting what's yours. Some of us have learned that lesson the hard way. With each passing day, I found more strength to stand my ground." I installed security cameras around my home after noticing Barbara's car driving by repeatedly. I documented every communication from her and Mark, building a case for harassment if needed. What had started as an attempt to steal my inheritance had revealed the true nature of my marriage and in-laws. Though painful, this clarity was ultimately a gift, allowing me to protect myself before deeper entanglements made it impossible. 3 weeks after Mark moved out, Barbara escalated to legal threats. Her lawyer, a college friend of hers, sent a letter claiming that as Mark's wife, I had an obligation to financially support him in the manner to which he has become accustomed. The irony of this statement, given our modest lifestyle compared to Barbara's excesses, would have been laughable if it weren't so infuriating. My divorce attorney assured me the claim had no merit, especially given the short duration of our marriage and the fact that Mark earned a good salary on his own. "This is intimidation, not legitimate legal action," she explained. Barbara's next move was to call a family meeting to reason with me. Mark delivered the message saying everyone was concerned about the division in the family and wanted to find a peaceful resolution. "Mum just wants to clear the air," he insisted. "Everyone will be there. Please, Whitney. For me." Against my better judgment and my attorney's advice, I agreed to attend, if only to make it clear that I wouldn't be manipulated any further. I arrived at Barbara's house to find not just Mark and his siblings, but several extended family members. I'd only met at our wedding, all sitting in Barbara's formal living room, with expressions ranging from curiosity to hostility. Barbara had positioned herself in her favourite armchair like a queen holding court. She wore a sombre outfit that nonetheless managed to display her wealth with diamond earrings, catching the light as she turned to acknowledge my arrival. "Whitney, thank you for joining us," she said, her voice gentle but carrying to everyone in the room. "We're all here because we care about this family, and recent events have been concerning." What followed was a masterclass in manipulation. Barbara presented herself as the wounded matriarch, confused and hurt by my sudden hostility and refusal to share blessings with family. She spoke about Mark's devotion as a husband and her own generosity as a mother-in-law. Tears appeared precisely on cue as she described how my greed was tearing apart a once happy family. "All we've ever wanted is what's best for both of you," she said, dabbing at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. "These properties should benefit the whole family." "That's what family means." Mark's siblings nodded in agreement. His brother Thomas spoke about family unity and tradition. His sister talked about how her children, my nieces and nephews, could benefit from the educational opportunities this money could provide. I sat quietly letting them all finish. Then I opened my purse and pulled out my phone. Before I respond, I'd like to play something for everyone. I pressed play on a recording from a conversation in my kitchen 3 days earlier when Barbara had let herself in with the key she'd apparently never returned. Barbara's voice filled the room. "Once we get control of those buildings, we'll sell the Victorian and the brick one immediately. The mid-century has the most units, so we'll keep that one for monthly income. I've already spoken to Richard about expected sale prices. We should clear at least $1.8 million after fees and taxes. Enough to clear my debts and renovate my kitchen with plenty left over." Shape. Mark's voice followed. "What about Whitney? She'll never agree to this." Barbara again. "She doesn't have to agree. You're her husband. In this state, you have rights to marital assets. We'll transfer the properties to both your names for estate planning purposes. Then you can make the decisions. Peterson's an old man running a small practice. He won't stand against Johnson and Marks." She named a prestigious law firm in the city. The recording continued, revealing their detailed plans for my inheritance and their strategic approach to manipulating me into compliance. Barbara's voice was cold and calculating, nothing like the tearful, wounded tone she'd just performed for the family gathering. When the recording ended, the room was dead silent. Barbara's face had drained of colour, while Mark looked like he might be sick. "That's illegal," Barbara finally spluttered. "You can't record people without their consent." "Actually," I replied calmly, "Oregon is a one-party consent state. Since I was returning home and heard you both in my kitchen, I began recording for my own protection before entering. Perfectly legal." I stood up and addressed the entire family. "There's something else you should know. My grandmother anticipated that someone might try to take advantage of her estate. She created an irrevocable trust before she died. The properties aren't in my name directly. They're in the trust, which explicitly prohibits any transfer to Mark or any member of the Mitchell family." Barbara's face contorted with rage. "She manipulated your grandmother. That old woman wasn't in her right mind." I withdrew Eleanor's letter from my purse. "My grandmother was mentally sharp until the end. Here's a notarized letter she wrote explaining her decisions and concerns, specifically about you, Barbara." As murmurs spread through the room, Jessica unexpectedly spoke up. "It's true what Whitney's saying about Barbara. She did the same thing to me after my parents died. My inheritance was supposed to be for our children's education, but after Barbara got involved, it disappeared into investments that mysteriously failed." Thomas looked at his wife in shock. "You never told me that." "Because your mother convinced you I was financially irresponsible," Jessica replied, years of resentment in her voice. "It was easier to blame me than admit what really happened." One by one, family members began sharing similar stories. A cousin whose business loan from Barbara came with unexpected control over his company. An aunt who lost her vacation home in a joint investment opportunity Barbara had arranged. The pattern was undeniable. Barbara attempted to regain control of the narrative, her voice rising. "This is absurd. I've only ever acted in this family's best interest. Whitney is turning you all against me with these lies and manipulations." But the damage was done. Family members were connecting dots, recognizing patterns in their own experiences with Barbara that they'd previously dismissed or rationalized. Mark made one last weak attempt to defend his mother. "Whitney, please. Mom made some mistakes, but her heart was in the right place. We can work this out as a family." I looked at the man I had married, truly seeing him for the first time. "No, Mark, we can't. I've already filed for divorce. My attorney will contact yours tomorrow." Barbara lunged forward, her composure completely shattered. "You ungrateful little gold digger. After everything I've done to welcome you into this family, those properties should be ours." "They were never yours to claim," I replied, gathering my things. "And neither was I." I walked out of Barbara's house, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Behind me, I could hear the continued arguments and recriminations, but they were no longer my concern. For the first time since my grandmother's death, I felt her presence strongly, as if she were walking beside me, proud of my strength. The next day, Barbara made one final desperate attempt. She appeared at my office with a document her lawyer had prepared, claiming that she had loaned Mark and me money for our home renovation that entitled her to partial ownership of any assets we acquired during the marriage. The claim was completely fabricated. Barbara had never given us money for renovations, something my financial records clearly proved. My attorney sent a cease and desist letter threatening counterclaims for harassment and attempted fraud if she continued. That evening, I slept peacefully for the first time in months. The next morning, I met with Grace, the property manager, and the tenants of all 3 buildings to introduce myself as their new landlord. I assured them that despite rumours they might have heard, the buildings were not being sold and no major changes were planned. My grandmother valued you all as tenants, I told them. Her legacy includes the community she built in these buildings, and I intend to honour that. Yes, 6 months passed, bringing significant changes to my life. The divorce was finalised with surprising speed once Mark realised the trust protected the properties from any claims. He received the house in the settlement, which seemed fair since my rental income from the apartments far exceeded its value. I found a comfortable condo in one of my own buildings when a tenant relocated for work. Living there gave me a deeper appreciation for the community my grandmother had cultivated. The residents were diverse in age and background, but shared a respect for the property and each other that spoke to Eleanor's careful tenant selection over the years. I honoured my grandmother's legacy by maintaining her high standards for the buildings. Working with Grace, I implemented improvements the tenants had requested for years, updated laundry facilities, a small community garden on the roof of the mid-century building, and a secure package delivery system. These investments strengthened the sense of community and increased the property's value. My architectural career flourished as I found new confidence in my professional judgment. Without Mark and Barbara's constant undermining, I trusted my instincts more fully and took on challenging projects I might previously have hesitated to pursue. 6 months after the divorce, I was promoted to senior project manager at my firm overseeing our most prestigious commercial developments. The Mitchell family experienced its own transformations in the aftermath of our confrontation. Barbara's carefully constructed facade of familial devotion crumbled once her financial manipulations were exposed. Several family members, including Jessica and Thomas, began to establish boundaries with her, refusing to participate in her schemes or submit to her control. Mark attempted reconciliation several times, his messages growing increasingly desperate as he realised what he had lost. "I miss you," he wrote. "Mum was wrong about everything. I see that now." But it was too late. The trust he had broken couldn't be repaired. In his weakness and complicity, he had revealed his true character, and no apology could undo that knowledge. Surprisingly, some family relationships survived and even strengthened. Jessica and I developed a genuine friendship, supporting each other through the challenges of disentangling our lives from Barbara's influence. Several cousins reached out to apologize for their role in the family meeting, admitting they'd been manipulated by Barbara's selective storytelling. One unexpected outcome was the creation of a support group for people dealing with toxic family situations. What began as casual coffee meetings with Jessica expanded to include others with similar experiences. Together we navigated the complex emotions of setting boundaries with family and rebuilding our sense of self-worth after years of manipulation. On the anniversary of Eleanor's death, I visited her small house, which I had decided to keep rather than sell. I had converted the backyard into a memorial garden with her favourite roses and a small bench where I could sit and feel connected to her memory. While cleaning out a box of her personal papers, I discovered something remarkable: additional letters Eleanor had written to me, each addressed for a specific life milestone or challenge. "For when you doubt your path, read one envelope. For when you achieve something wonderful," said another. "For when you need to remember who you are," a third proclaimed. Reading these letters brought fresh tears, but also profound gratitude. My grandmother had anticipated not just the potential threat from Barbara, but the emotional journey I would need to navigate afterward. Her wisdom continued to guide me even in her absence. Inspired by Eleanor's financial literacy and foresight, I began volunteering at a women's centre teaching basic investment principles and financial independence. Many participants were emerging from controlling relationships and needed practical tools to secure their futures. Sharing Eleanor's philosophy about the importance of financial self-sufficiency became a way to honour her legacy beyond maintaining the buildings she left me. What began as Barbara's attempt to steal my inheritance ultimately led to unexpected freedom and strength. By trying to take what was mine, she inadvertently revealed the fragility of my marriage and the toxicity of her influence. In losing a husband and in-laws who valued control over respect, I gained clarity about the kind of relationships I wanted in my life moving forward. The peace I found came not just from financial security, but from honouring my grandmother's true legacy, the courage to stand up for myself, the wisdom to recognise manipulation, and the strength to walk away from relationships that demanded my dignity as the price of admission. Eleanor's final gift wasn't the buildings themselves, but the trust that protected them both literally and metaphorically. She trusted me to make the right decisions when faced with difficult choices. She trusted my judgment enough to put safeguards in place that would give me time to recognize the truth about Mark and Barbara. And ultimately, she trusted that I would choose self-respect over appeasement, just as she had taught me throughout my life. As I look toward my future, I carry with me the most important lesson from this painful chapter. True family is built on respect, not blood or manipulation. Family supports your growth rather than controlling your choices. Family celebrates your success instead of trying to claim it as their own. I'm creating a life and legacy that would make Eleanor proud, one built on the values she instilled in me, rather than the materialistic priorities Barbara championed. The apartments aren't just buildings or financial assets. They're a daily reminder that I am capable, worthy, and strong enough to protect what's mine. Have you ever had to stand up to someone who tried to take advantage of you? What gave you the strength to hold your ground? Drop a comment below sharing your story. And if this tale of standing up to a manipulative mother-in-law resonated with you, please hit the like button, subscribe to my channel, and share this video with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to protect what's rightfully theirs. Remember, sometimes losing what you thought was family makes room for building something more authentic. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you the courage to trust your instincts when they tell you something isn't right.